Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Dark Desire Studio. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for your love, your support, and for being part of this journey with me. Grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and take a deep breath, because the story I'm about to share is one of love that defies expectations, patience that conquers doubt, and a devotion that refuses to see age as anything but a number. A love that sees the soul before the years. So relax, let your heart open, and let's get lost together in this emotional, romantic tale. The boardroom smelled of leather and ambition. 26-year-old Edward Jones stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, his reflection sharp against the city skyline. Beyond the glass, the world moved in blurs of traffic and commerce, but he saw none of it. His mind was elsewhere, circling endlessly around the woman whose presence had become both his anchor and his undoing. He had built this empire from nothing, a tech startup that had exploded into a multi-million-dollar corporation in just 5 years. Forbes had called him a prodigy. The business world called him a genius, the youngest CEO to ever dominate his industry. But what good was an empire when every achievement felt hollow? When every victory celebration of time returning to an empty penthouse, surrounded by wealth but starved for connection. He had tried to fill the void. Dated models who graced magazine covers, socialites who knew all the right people and said all the right things, women who looked perfect on his arm at galas, their smiles bright and practiced. But Edwards could feel it, the emptiness behind their eyes. They didn't see him. They saw the money, the power, the image. They wanted the CEO, not the man who sometimes worked until dawn, because he was terrified of his own thoughts, not the man who craved genuine conversation or than champagne toasts. His friends thought he was too picky. His business partner, Marcus, thought he was addicted to work. His mother thought he was scared of commitment. But there was one person, one woman who understood him without trying. Armani Johnson had been his executive secretary for 3 years. At 35, she carried herself with a quiet elegance that commanded respect without demanding attention. She was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that anticipated problems before they emerged, that turned chaos into order with a few keystrokes and a calm voice. Her presence made impossible days bearable. Her rare laugh, genuine and unguarded, could cut through his darkest moods like sunlight through storm clouds. Edwards had tried to ignore it at first. The way his heart quickened when she walked into his office each morning, tablet in hand, already 3 steps ahead of his thoughts. The way he found excuses to work late, just to hear her voice one more time before she left for the evening. The way her knowing smile made him feel seen in a way that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. It was a love that made no sense on paper. A 9-year age gap, a CEO and his secretary, a power dynamic that whispered of scandal, a connection that the world would judge, dissect, and condemn. But to Edwards, none of that mattered. To him, Armani Johnson wasn't just his secretary. She was everything he'd been searching for, a world that offered him everything except what he truly needed. The evening sun cast long shadows across his office as Edwards finally turned from the window. His eyes found her through the glass walls of the adjoining workspace. Armani sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her face as she worked with that focused intensity he'd come to admire. Professional, polite, untouchable. "Mr. Jones," she would say, her voice steady and warm. "Your 3 p.m. meeting has been moved to tomorrow. Call me Edwards." He wanted to say every single time, "Stop treating me like just another boss. Stop pretending you don't feel this too." But he never did, because he saw the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, not with indifference, but with something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or caution, as if she knew exactly what acknowledging the tension between them would mean, as if she understood that once they crossed that line, there would be no going back. And so they existed in this careful dance. Professional courtesy masking something that burned beneath the surface. Unspoken words filling the space between them like smoke, invisible but impossible to ignore. Edwards pressed his palm against the cool glass, his jaw tightening with resolve. How much longer could he pretend? How many more mornings could he watch her walk through his door and pretend his world didn't shift on its axis? How many more nights could he lie awake, imagining a conversation he didn't have the courage to start? The answer came to him with sudden clarity. Not much longer, because 3 years of silent longing had brought him to this precipice. 3 years of watching her, wanting her, admiring her from a distance that felt like miles even when they stood inches apart. 3 years of building walls to protect himself from a truth he could no longer deny. He was in love with Amani Johnson, and tonight, everything was about to change. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I hope this story makes you believe age is just a number when it comes to love. Now let's get back to our story. Edwards remained at the window, his reflection a ghost against the darkening skyline. But his eyes weren't on the city anymore. They were fixed on Amani through the glass walls that separated his office from hers. She was gathering her things, preparing to leave for the evening, moving with that efficient grace that had captivated him from the very beginning. 3 years, he thought. 3 years of this exquisite torture. He closed his eyes, and memory pulled him backward. The first time Amani Johnson walked into his office, Edwards had been drowning. His previous secretary had quit without notice, leaving him buried under a mountain of unorganized chaos, right before the biggest investor meeting of his career. He'd been 23 then, barely holding his startup together with caffeine and desperation. She appeared in his doorway at 8 a.m. sharp, tablet already in hand. "Mr. Jones," she'd said, her voice steady and professional. "I'm Amani Johnson, sent by the staffing agency. I understand you have the Morrison pitch in 4 hours and can't find half your presentation materials." He'd looked up, disheveled and exhausted, and found himself staring at a woman who seemed entirely too composed for the disaster she'd just walked into. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her eyes that struck him intelligent, assessing, completely unfazed by the papers scattered across every surface. "That's an accurate summary," he'd managed. "Then let's get to work." She'd rolled up her sleeves, and for the next 3 hours, she'd transformed chaos into order. She didn't just find his materials, she reorganized them, spotted inconsistencies in his data, and suggested 3 improvements to his pitch that made him look like a genius in front of the investors. The meeting had been a success, a triumph, actually, and when they'd returned to the office that evening, both exhausted but exhilarated, Edwards had made his decision immediately. "I want to hire you permanently," he'd said. "Name your price." She'd smiled on a small, knowing smile. "I don't need you to overpay me, Mr. Jones. I need you to trust me to do my job, and I need Thursdays off for a standing appointment." Done. He'd extended his hand, and when she'd shaken it, he'd felt something shift. Something he'd immediately told himself was just gratitude. But gratitude didn't explain why he found himself watching her over the following weeks, noticing the way she hummed softly while organizing files, the way she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, coffee appearing on his desk exactly when he needed it, meetings rescheduled before conflicts arose, problems solved before they became crises. 2 months in, they'd been working until midnight on an impossible deadline. Amani had been at her desk, tie loosened, hair escaping its neat bun, fingers flying across her keyboard. He'd brought her coffee this time, and when he'd set it down beside her, she'd looked up with genuine surprise. "You didn't have to do that," she'd said softly. "You've been here as long as I have. It's the least I can do." She'd taken a sip, then laughed a real, unguarded laugh that lit up her entire face. "This is terrible coffee, Mr. Jones, I know," he'd admitted, grinning. "But it's caffeinated." That laugh had echoed in his mind 4 weeks afterward. He'd found himself trying to make her laugh again, just to hear that sound, just to see that unguarded version of her emerge from behind the professional facade. By the second year, Amani had become indispensable, not just professionally, though she'd proven herself brilliant in ways that extended far beyond secretarial duties. She understood business strategy, could read people with uncanny accuracy, and had saved him from more than one disastrous decision with a carefully worded observation. But it was more than that. She'd become his anchor. The moment Edwards understood this completely came during the TechVision deal. He'd staked everything on the partnership, months of negotiations, millions in projected revenue, his company's entire growth strategy. When the CEO of TechVision called to back out, citing concerns about Edwards' age and experience, Edwards had felt his world tilt. He'd stood in his office, staring at nothing, the phone still in his hand. Armani had appeared in his doorway within minutes. She always knew when something was wrong. What happened? She'd asked quietly. TechVision pulled out. They don't think I'm seasoned enough. The words had tasted bitter. 3 months of work, gone. And they're right. Maybe I am just a kid playing at being a CEO. Armani had walked into his office and closed the door behind her. Edwards, his first name, rare on her lips, had made him look up. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He'd shaken his head, afraid to speak. I see someone who built a multi-million-dollar company before most people finish graduate school. Someone who works harder than anyone I've ever met. Someone who actually listens to their team, instead of just dictating orders. She'd stepped closer. You're not playing at anything. You are a CEO, and TechVision just made the mistake of their lives. How can you be so sure? Because I've worked for seasoned CEOs, Edwards. Most of them were arrogant, short-sighted, and too proud to admit when they didn't know something. You're twice the leader any of them were. Her eyes had held his. So you're going to take this setback, learn from it, and prove them wrong. That's what real leaders do. In that moment, something had crystallized for Edwards. This wasn't just respect or admiration. This was something deeper, something dangerous. He'd wanted to reach for her, to close the distance between them and, thank you, he'd whispered instead. I don't know what I'd do without you. Something had flickered in her eyes then, something that looked almost like longing before she'd smoothed it away. You'd figure it out, but lucky for you, you won't have to. By the 3rd year, Edwards had stopped lying to himself. He was in love with Armani Johnson, and it was becoming increasingly obvious. Marcus had cornered him at a company event, watching as Edwards' eyes tracked Armani across the room. You know everyone can see it, right? See what? The way you look at her. Marcus had taken a sip of his drink, like she's the only person in the room, like you'd set the world on fire if she asked you to. Edwards had tensed. It's not, relax. I'm not judging, but you might want to be more careful. People are starting to talk. The warnings had only made Edwards more aware of what he was trying to hide. He'd started noticing things about Armani, 2 things that suggested her life held more pain than her professional composure revealed. The faded tan line, where a wedding ring used to be. The phone conversation he'd accidentally overheard. Mom, I'm fine. Yes, I'm eating. No, I'm not seeing anyone. I told you I'm done with all that. The way her smile sometimes didn't quite reach her eyes. The careful distance she maintained, even after 3 years of working inches apart. One afternoon, they'd both reached for the same file on his desk. Their hands had touched just fingertips brushing, and electricity had shot through Edwards so intensely he jerked back. Armani had pulled away just as quickly, color rising in her cheeks. Sorry, they'd both said simultaneously. For a heartbeat, their eyes had met, and in that moment, Edwards had seen it clearly. She felt it too. The connection, the pull, the impossibility of what simmered between them. Then she'd looked away, gathered the file, and retreated to her desk without another word. Edwards had stood there, hands still tingling from her touch, knowing with absolute certainty that he couldn't continue like this. Something had to give, and it would tonight. The office had emptied hours ago. Friday evening stretched into night, and the only sounds were the hum of Edwards' computer and the distant rumble of traffic 40 floors below. Papers were scattered across his desk in controlled chaos: contracts, financial projections, legal briefs, all pieces of the Meridian merger that refused to come together. Edwards dragged his hands through his hair, frustration mounting with each passing minute. This deal was crucial. If he could pull it off, His company would triple in value overnight, but the numbers weren't aligning. The legal language kept contradicting itself, and his exhausted brain felt like it was moving through mud. He didn't hear her approach, didn't register her presence until a steaming cup of coffee appeared at the edge of his desk, accompanied by that familiar scent vanilla and something floral he'd never been able to identify. "You need to rest," Armani said softly. Edwards didn't look up, his eyes still fixed on the contract that blurred before him. "I need to finish this. The board meeting is Monday morning, and I'm nowhere near." Edwards, he froze, the papers in his hand forgotten. She never called him by his first name. Never. In 3 years. It had always been Mr. Jones with that careful professional distance that drove him crazy. He looked up slowly, and what he saw made his breath catch. She stood there in the doorway of his office, jacket discarded, hair escaping its pins, looking softer somehow, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. And in her eyes, those eyes he'd memorized 1,000 times, he saw something that looked almost like concern. "You can't save the world in one night," she continued, her voice gentler now. "You're exhausted. Whatever you accomplish in this state won't be your best work anyway." Edwards set down the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "Why do you care?" The question came out quieter than he'd intended, more vulnerable. It hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things he'd never said. Armani hesitated, her fingers curling around the door frame. For a moment, he thought she might retreat, might hide behind that professional mask again. But then she took a breath and answered with devastating honesty, "Because someone has to." The silence that followed was suffocating, charged, electric in a way that made the air between them feel alive. Edwards could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he slowly stood, his chair rolling back with the movement. He didn't think, didn't plan, he simply moved, closing the distance between them until they were barely a breath apart, close enough that he could see the slight widening of her eyes, the way her breath caught, the pulse fluttering at her throat. "Armani," he whispered, his voice rough. "Tell me I'm not imagining this." Her eyes glistened, and for a heartbeat, one perfect, suspended heartbeat, he thought she might close the remaining distance, might finally admit what he'd been seeing in stalling glances and accidental touches for 3 years. But then she stepped back, and the walls slammed into place. "Edwards, don't." Her voice shook slightly. "You're my boss. This is inappropriate. We can't." "Why not?" He moved forward again, desperate, unable to stop now that the words had started. "Tell me why not." "Because." Her composure cracked, voice rising. "Because people will talk. Because you're my boss, and I'm your secretary, and there are rules about this kind of thing. Because," she faltered, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "Because I'm 9 years older than you, Edwards. 9 years. You're 26. You should be with someone young and vibrant and what?" He interrupted, his voice firm despite the way his hands shook. "Someone who doesn't actually see me. Someone who wants the CEO but not the man. Someone who treats me like a bank account with a nice smile." He took another step closer, and she didn't retreat this time. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Armani? I see the most intelligent woman I've ever met. Someone who makes me feel seen, really seen for the first time in my life. Someone who treats me like a man instead of a title or a net worth or a magazine cover." His voice dropped, raw with emotion. "I see the only person in this entire city who makes me feel like I'm not alone." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking for. Then help me understand." The desperation in his voice surprised even him. "Because all I know is that I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to stop thinking about you. And I'm tired, so tired of pretending that what's between us doesn't exist." For a moment, she looked at him with such longing that his heart stuttered. Her lips parted as if she might finally say what he needed to hear. Then she shook her head, the movement almost violent. "I can't do this." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, a gesture of protection, of shutting him out. "I'm sorry, Edwards. I'm so sorry. But I can't." Her voice broke completely. She turned away, heading for her desk in quick, desperate steps. "Armani, wait." I need to go." The words came out barely above a whisper as she grabbed her purse with shaking hands. "I'll see you Monday, Amani." But she was already gone, practically fleeing toward the elevators. He heard the chime of the doors opening, then closing. And then there was only silence. Edwards stood frozen in the middle of his office, surrounded by the scattered papers of a merger that suddenly felt meaningless. His chest felt tight, his breath coming in short bursts. He'd done it. He'd finally said the words that had been burning inside him for 3 years. And she'd run. His eyes fell on the coffee cup she'd brought, still sitting on his desk, still warm, steam rising from it like a ghost of her presence. He walked over slowly, picked it up with trembling hands, and took a sip. It was perfect, made exactly the way he liked it, the way she'd memorized without him ever having to ask. Edwards sank into his chair, the cup cradled in his hands, and closed his eyes. The Meridian merger forgotten, the scattered papers meaningless, because everything had just changed, and there was no going back now. She knew how he felt, and on Monday morning, they would have to face each other with that knowledge hanging between them like an undetonated bomb. He took another sip of coffee and whispered into the empty office, "I'm not giving up on you. Not now. Not ever." The city lights glittered beyond his windows, indifferent and eternal. But inside Edwards Jones, something had shifted irrevocably. The confession was out. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if she would run forever, or if somehow, impossibly, she found the courage to run toward him instead. The following weeks were torture. Monday morning arrived with a cruelty Edwards hadn't anticipated. He'd spent the entire weekend rehearsing what he'd say when Amani walked through his door. Apologies, explanations, promises that things could go back to normal, if that's what she needed. But when she arrived at precisely 8 a.m., her face was a mask of perfect professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Jones." The formality of it felt like a slap. "Your schedule updated on your tablet. The Meridian team called. They'd like to move the presentation to Tuesday instead of Monday." "Armani, about Friday. Will there be anything else?" Her eyes never met his. They remained fixed somewhere over his left shoulder, as if looking at him directly might shatter her carefully constructed composure. "No," he'd whispered, defeated. "That's all." She'd nodded crisply and retreated to her desk, closing the invisible door between them more firmly than any physical barrier could. And so it continued. Day after excruciating day, Amani remained flawlessly professional. Her work didn't suffer. If anything, she became even more efficient, as if channeling all her energy into being the perfect secretary. But the warmth was gone, the knowing smiles, the moments when their eyes would meet and understanding would pass between them wordlessly. She avoided his gaze like it might burn her, kept their interactions brief and transactional, and every evening, at exactly 5:30 p.m., she would gather her things and leave without a backward glance, as if staying even 1 minute longer might be dangerous. Edwards felt himself unraveling. In a board meeting on Wednesday, he'd snapped at his CFO for a minor budget discrepancy, his voice sharp enough that the entire room had fallen silent. On Thursday, he'd sat through a presentation without hearing a single word, his eyes drawn repeatedly to Amani's silhouette through the glass walls. On Friday, he'd found himself staring at a contract for 20 minutes without processing a single sentence. The office noticed. Of course they noticed. Whispers started circulating through the break rooms and conference spaces. Something was wrong with the CEO. Had anyone seen the way he watched Miss Johnson? The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. What had happened? Edwards didn't care about the gossip. He cared that Amani was slipping through his fingers like water, and he had no idea how to hold on. Marcus found him on Friday evening, nursing a whiskey in the empty office bar on the 38th floor. His business partner slid onto the stool beside him without invitation. "You look like hell," Marcus observed. "Thank you for that insight. Want to talk about it?" "No." Marcus ordered his own drink, and they sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You're in love with your secretary." It wasn't a question. Edwards didn't bother denying it. She's older than you, isn't she? Marcus continued, his voice gentler now. That's what everyone's whispering about. They've noticed the way you look at her. The way she's been avoiding you. 9 years, Edwards said quietly, staring into his glass. She's 9 years older. As if that matters. It matters to her. I don't care what people think, but she does, Marcus said. And the truth of it hit Edwards like a physical blow. That's the problem, isn't it? You're willing to weather the storm, but she's the one who'll bear the brunt of it. The secretary who seduced her younger boss, the older woman who trapped the wealthy CEO. You know how cruel people can be. Edwards' hand tightened around his glass. So what am I supposed to do? Just let her go? No, Marcus took a sip of his drink. You need to decide if you're willing to fight for her, really fight, because it won't be easy, Edwards. There will be whispers, judgments, your mother will have opinions, the board might question your judgment. And Amani, she need to believe you're strong enough to handle all of that. I am. Then prove it to her. Marcus stood, clapping a hand on Edwards' shoulder. But first, you need to understand what you're up against. Why she's so afraid. What do you mean? Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing whether to continue. I made some calls, asked some discreet questions through my network in Boston. Edwards turned sharply. Boston. That's where she worked before moving here 3 years ago. Yes, Marcus's expression was grim. She was married. Edwards, divorced 3 years ago right before she moved to New York. Her ex-husband is a real piece of work, lawyer, well-connected family. When he left her, he made sure everyone knew why. Why? Edwards's voice was barely above a whisper. He cited her inability to have children. Made it very public, very humiliating, framed it like she'd deceived him somehow, like she was defective. Marcus's jaw tightened. The man's a bastard, but the damage was done. Amani became the subject of every gossip column and social circle in Boston. That's why she left, why she started over here, when no one knew her story. Edwards felt sick. Everything suddenly made sense. Her walls, her fear, her insistence that he deserved someone young and vibrant, someone who could give him things she believed she couldn't. She's been hiding, Marcus continued, protecting herself, building walls so high that no one could hurt her again. He met Edwards's eyes. And then you came along and made her feel something. That terrifies her. Edwards stood abruptly, his mind racing. I need to see her. Tonight, right now. Edwards, I can't let her think I'd ever do to her what he did. I can't let her believe for one more second that any of that matters to me. His voice was fierce, determined. I love her, Marcus, not despite her past or her age or any of the things she thinks make her unworthy. I love her because of who she is. And she needs to hear that. Marcus smiled slightly. Then go. But Edwards, bring flowers. Women appreciate the gesture. An hour later, Edwards stood outside Amani's apartment building in Brooklyn, a bouquet of white peonies clutched in one hand, her favorite. He'd learned from an offhand comment she'd made months ago. His heart hammered against his ribs, so violently he thought it might break through. The building was modest but well maintained, with warm light spilling from various windows. He'd found her address in the HR files, probably unethical, definitely desperate. His finger hovered over her doorbell. Apartment 4B. Just one press. And there would be no turning back. Fear warred with determination inside him. What if she refused to see him? What if she called security? What if his confession only drove her further away? But then he thought of her eyes that Friday night, the longing he'd seen before fear took over. The way she'd said someone has too when he'd asked why she cared. The 3 years of quiet devotion she'd given him without asking for anything in return. She deserved to know the truth. All of it. Edwards took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and pressed a button. The intercom crackled to life. Yes, her voice. Even through the static, It made his chest ache. "Armani," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's Edwards. Please, I need to talk to you." A long silence followed. He held his breath, waiting, hoping, praying she wouldn't turn him away. Then, finally, "Edwards, you shouldn't be here. I know. But I'm not leaving until you hear what I have to say." He pressed closer to the intercom. "Please, Armani, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Another pause that felt like an eternity. Then the door buzzed open. Edwards climbed the 4 flights of stairs, 2 at a time, his heart thundering in his chest. The peonies felt heavy in his grip, or maybe that was just his hands shaking. When he reached apartment 4B, the door was already opening. Armani stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair down for the first time he could remember, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. "Edwards, what are you? I love you." The words came out before she could finish, raw and unfiltered. They hung in the air between them, and he watched her face transform, shock giving way to something that looked like pain. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Please don't do this. It's too late." He stepped closer, and she didn't retreat. "I'm already doing it. I love you, Armani. I've loved you for longer than I've had the courage to admit, and I won't pretend anymore." "You don't know what you're saying." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. I know you're scared." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know the world will judge us. I know people will whisper about the age difference and the power dynamic and every other reason they can find to tear us down. I know you think you're too old for me, that I'll wake up one day and realize I made a mistake." Tears welled in her eyes, and one spilled over, tracking down her cheek. "But you're wrong," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not too old. You're not a mistake. You're exactly right. You're everything I've been searching for in every empty relationship, every meaningless date, every hollow victory that left me feeling more alone than before." "Stop." The word came out as a sob. "Edwards, please stop." "Why?" "Because the truth hurts. Because admitting what's between us means taking a risk." He took another step, close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell that vanilla and floral scent that haunted him. "I'm willing to take that risk, Armani. The question is, are you?" She wrapped her arms around herself defensively, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't understand. I'm damaged, Edwards, broken. I'm not." I can't. Her voice broke completely, and Edwards felt something tear inside his chest. "My ex-husband," she continued, the words tumbling out like a confession she'd held back too long. "He left me because I couldn't give him children. 3 years of marriage, and when we found out I couldn't conceive, he just walked away, like I was defective, like I wasn't worth staying for, if I couldn't give him that one thing. Armani." He made sure everyone knew. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Every friend, every colleague, every social circle in Boston. The woman who couldn't be a real wife. The woman who wasn't enough. She looked up at him with eyes full of anguish. "I've been rejected, Edwards. Humiliated. I can't survive that again. I won't." Edwards set the flowers down on the small table by a door and stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between them. When he spoke, his voice was low and fierce. "I am not him." She blinked, startled by the intensity in his tone. "Whatever that man did to you, whatever he made you believe about yourself, it was a lie. All of it." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "You're not damaged. You're not broken. You're not defective or insufficient or any other cruel word he made you believe. But I can't give you. I don't care." The words came out sharp, almost angry. "Do you hear me? I don't care about children or conventional futures or any predetermined path I'm supposed to want. I care about you, just you. The woman who makes me laugh, who sees me when no one else does, who makes me feel less alone in a city of millions." Armani's breath hitched. but she didn't pull away from his touch. "Let me prove to you that I'm not him," Edwards continued, his voice softening. "Let me show you that love isn't measured in years or expectations or biological possibilities. It's measured in devotion, in showing up, in choosing someone every single day." He paused, making sure she was looking at him. "And mine is unwavering. My devotion to you, it doesn't depend on your age or your past or anything except who you are right now." In this moment, for a long moment, Armani simply stared at him, really looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time, searching his eyes for doubt or hesitation or the inevitable disappointment she'd learned to expect. But Edwards didn't look away, didn't flinch. He let her see everything: the love, the certainty, the absolute conviction that she was worth fighting for. Slowly, tentatively, she reached for his hand. Her fingers trembled as they intertwined with his, and the simple touch sent electricity racing through his entire body. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I'm terrified of losing you, of not being enough, of letting you down, but I'd rather be terrified with you than empty without you." Something in her expression shifted, a wall cracking, a defense crumbling, and then she was moving forward, closing the last inches between them, and his arms came around her instinctively. She felt perfect against him, like every piece that had been missing suddenly clicked into place. "Edwards," she breathed against his chest. He pulled back just enough to see her face, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Tell me this is real. Tell me you feel it too." Instead of answering with words, Armani rose on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, soft and uncertain, testing the waters of something they'd both tried so hard to deny. But then Edwards's hands slid into her hair and her fingers clutched his shirt, and the kiss deepened, became desperate, 3 years of longing and restraint finally breaking free. They kissed like people drowning, like people who'd been holding their breath for too long and finally could breathe. Edwards's back hit the doorframe and Armani pressed closer, and somewhere in the back of his mind he registered that they were still in a doorway, that neighbors might see, that this was reckless and public and everything they should probably avoid. But he didn't care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Edwards rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this means what I think it means." Armani's eyes were still closed, her fingers still fisted in his shirt. "I don't know what this means," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how this works. The logistics, the office, the everything. Then let's figure it out together." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "One step at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just ... us." She looked at him for a long moment, fear and hope warring in her expression. Then, slowly, she nodded. "One dinner," she whispered. "One chance. That's all I can promise right now." Edwards smiled, relief and joy flooding through him in equal measure. "One dinner is all I need." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a confession. And when he finally left her apartment an hour later, after talking, after more kissing, after making plans for Saturday night, Edwards felt like he could float down the 4 flights of stairs. Armani's walls were still standing, but they were cracked now, and with time, with patience, with the kind of devotion he'd promised her, he would help her tear them down completely, one dinner at a time. The following months were a baptism by fire. That first dinner had led to a second, then a third. Quiet evenings where they talked 4 hours, learning each other beyond the professional masks they'd worn for 3 years. Edwards discovered that Armani loved old jazz records and terrible reality TV, that she'd wanted to be an architect before life took her in a different direction, that she was funny genuinely, laugh until you cry funny when she let her guard down. And slowly, carefully, they'd begun building something real. But the world, as Armani had predicted, had opinions. The first blow came in aboard. Meeting 3 months into their relationship, Edwards had just proposed, promoting Armani to Chief Operating Officer, a position she'd more than earned through her strategic insights and flawless execution. He'd prepared a comprehensive presentation documenting her contributions, the Meridian merger she'd helped salvage, the operational efficiencies she'd implemented, the 5 major clients she'd personally retained through relationship management. Richard Thornton, the most senior board member and the relic of old money corporate culture, cleared his throat before Edwards had finished. With all due respect, Edwards, this seems ill-advised. How so? Edwards kept his voice level. Miss Johnson is your secretary. This promotion represents a rather dramatic leap. Thornton's eyes were sharp. One might question whether your judgment is being clouded by personal considerations. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. My judgment, Edwards said, his voice cold as steel, is based on 3 years of exceptional performance. Armani Johnson has contributed more to this company's success than half the executives in this room. That may be true, but optics matter. You're romantically involved with her, aren't you? The office has noticed. Edwards met his gaze without flinching. My personal life is irrelevant to her qualifications. She's earned this position through merit, and I have documentation to prove it. He pulled up slide after slide, quantifiable results, strategic wins, testimonials from department heads. By the time he finished, even Thornton looked grudgingly impressed. The promotion passed, barely, but Edwards knew it was only the beginning. The tabloid explosion happened 2 weeks later. They'd been careful, discreet, keeping their relationship private. But one dinner at a restaurant in Soho, one moment where Edwards had reached across the table to hold her hand, had been enough. The photo appeared the next morning. Tech prodigy's scandalous romance splashed across 3 gossip sites. By afternoon, it had made mainstream business news. CEO, 26, dating secretary, 35 inches, with helpful arrows pointing out the age gap like it was a criminal offense. The social media response was vicious. Edwards found Armani that evening in her apartment, sitting on her couch with her phone in her lap, tears streaming silently down her face. Don't look at those, he said immediately, crossing to her and gently taking the phone from her hands. But he'd already seen the screen. The comments: gold digger secured the bag, she, old enough to be his mother, wonder what she did to trap him, cradle robbing secretary strikes it rich, they're right. Armani whispered, look at what I've done to you. Your reputation. Stop. Edwards sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. They're not right. They're cruel and small-minded and completely ignorant of who you actually are. But the board, your investors, don't care about any of them more than I care about you. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. We knew this would happen. We talked about this. Talking about it and living through it are different things. She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. Maybe we should call things off, just until the attention dies down. No, the word came out sharp. That's exactly what they want. For us to hide, to be ashamed. I won't do that to you. I won't do that to us. He held her through the night, feeling her shake with silent sobs, hating every person who'd made her doubt herself, made her feel less than worthy. His mother called the next day. Edwards, darling, we need to talk about this situation. If by situation you mean Armani, then no, we don't. People are concerned. Your investors, your board members, even some of your clients. Her voice carried that careful concern that meant judgment. This woman, her name is Armani, is 9 years older than you. She was your secretary. Surely you can see how this looks. I see how it looks to people who care more about optics than substance. I'm dating an intelligent, accomplished woman who I happen to love. If that's a problem for you, that's your issue, not mine. Edwards, I'm trying to help you. You're throwing away your future for what? An infatuation. A mid-20s crisis. Something in Edwards snapped. Here's what's going to happen, Mom. You're going to accept Armani as part of my life, or you're going to lose me. Those are your options. Choose carefully. The line went silent. I'm serious, he continued, his voice quieter, but no less firm. I won't subject her to your judgment or anyone else's. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm not letting her go. Not for you. Not for the board. Not for anyone. His mother sighed. I hope you know what you're doing. I do, Edwards said, and he meant it. Late that night, Armani came to him with red-rimmed eyes. Maybe they're right, she whispered. Maybe I'm selfish for letting you do this, for letting you sacrifice your reputation, your relationships with your family. You're a stop. He pulled her close. The only thing selfish would be denying us both happiness because of fear, because of what small-minded people think. But what if? No what ifs. We're doing this together. And anyone who can't accept that doesn't deserve a place in our lives. The turning point came at the next board meeting. Edwards had arranged for Armani to present the quarterly operational review, her first major presentation as coup. She walked into that boardroom in a sharp navy suit, her head high despite the whispers that had followed her for weeks. And then she presented for 45 minutes. She walked them through operational transformations that had increased efficiency by 30%, cost savings that had added millions to the bottom line, strategic partnerships she'd cultivated that opened new markets. Her command of the material was absolute, her delivery flawless. When she finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Then Marcus started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Within seconds, it became a standing ovation, genuine respect from people who understood talent when they saw it. Even Thornton stood, nodding grudgingly. Armani's eyes found Edwards's across the room, and he saw it the moment she finally believed she belonged there. Not because of him, because of herself. 2 weeks later, at the company gala, Edwards made his choice. Armani stood beside him in an elegant black dress, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Cameras flashed constantly, press, investors, social media, everyone watching, waiting to see if the scandal would play out in real time. Edwards turned to her, ignoring the cameras, the whispers, the expectations. "Dance with me," he said softly. "Edwards, everyone's watching. Let them watch." He took her hand in full view of everyone and led her to the dance floor. And as they swayed together under the chandeliers, cameras flashing around them, Edwards didn't look away, didn't hide, didn't apologize. He looked at Armani like she was the only person in the room, because she was. The world could whisper all it wanted. They'd already won. 9 months had passed since that night at Armani's apartment. 9 months of fighting, growing, and proving to the world and to themselves that what they had was real. The whispers had quieted, not disappeared entirely. There would always be people who judged, but they'd faded into background noise. Respect had grown in their place. Armani had proven herself as coup time and again, her quarterly results speaking louder than any gossip ever could. The company had thrived under their partnership, both professional and personal, and Armani had transformed. The woman who'd once hidden behind professional walls now stood beside Edwards as his equal, confident, radiant, no longer apologizing for taking up space in his life or his boardroom. Edwards had been planning this moment for weeks, every detail carefully considered, every word rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. Now, as he led Armani through the empty office building on a Friday evening, his heart hammered with the same nervous energy he'd felt that night 9 months ago. "Where are we going?" Armani asked, laughing as he guided her toward the elevator. "You're being very mysterious. You'll see." He pressed the button for the roof access, something only he had clearance for. When the doors opened onto the rooftop terrace, Armani gasped. The space had been transformed, string lights crisscrossing overhead, candles flickering in glass hurricanes, the city sprawling below them in a glittering tapestry of light and life. "Edwards," she breathed, "what is all this? Come here." He took her hand, leading her to the edge, where they could see the entire skyline. The place where, 9 months ago in his office, just below them, everything had changed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Armani leaned into him, and Edwards wrapped his arm around her waist, marveling at how natural it felt. "How right. Do you remember?" she said softly. "How terrified I was. That night you came to my apartment. I remember. I was so sure you'd realize you'd made a mistake, that the age difference, the complications, the scrutiny that it would all be too much. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright. I never thought I could feel this safe, this seen, this loved. Edwards cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You've always deserved this, every bit of it. I'm just grateful you finally let yourself believe it, she smiled. That genuine, unguarded smile that still made his heart skip. You made me believe it. Your patience, your certainty, the way you stood beside me when the world tried to tear us apart. There was never any question of standing anywhere else. Armani kissed him softly, and for a moment, Edwards almost lost his nerve, almost forgot the plan entirely, and just lost himself in her. But he'd come here with a purpose. He pulled back gently, taking both their hands in his. Armani Johnson, he began, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. 9 months ago, I stood in my office right below us, terrified you'd never let me in, terrified that you'd run, and I'd lose my chance at the only thing that had ever made sense in my life. Her eyes widened, understanding beginning to dawn. You've taught me that love isn't about age or expectations, or what the world thinks we should be. It's about seeing someone, really seeing them, and choosing them every single day. It's about building something together that's stronger than any obstacle. Edwards slowly sank to one knee, and Armani's hand flew to her mouth, tears already glistening in her eyes. You've shown me what it means to be truly brave, he continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. To stand up for what matters, to choose love even when it's terrifying. And every day I spend with you, I fall more in love with your strength, your intelligence, your heart. He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band with a single diamond, elegant, understated, exactly her style. He'd spent weeks finding the perfect ring, something that reflected her essence, rather than his wealth. Armani, will you marry me? His voice cracked slightly with emotion, not because of what the world thinks, not because it's expected or conventional, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because you're my home, my partner, my everything. For a heartbeat, Armani just stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she was pulling him to his feet with surprising strength, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Edwards barely had time to slide the ring onto her finger before she was kissing him, fierce and desperate and joyful all at once. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as city lights twinkled below them, as if the universe itself was celebrating. When he finally set her down, she was still crying, clutching his face in her hands. I love you, she whispered, so much. Even when I was terrified, even when I tried to push you away, I loved you. I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I've always known. They stood together under the stars, the city sprawling beneath them, making whispered promises about their future, about the life they'd build together, about choosing each other every day, no matter what the world might say. 3 months later, the wedding was intimate, held in a small garden venue with only 50 guests. The people who truly mattered. Marcus stood as best man, Armani's college roommate as maid of honor. Even Edwards's mother had come. Her earlier reservations melted away after months of witnessing the genuine love between them. Armani walked down the aisle, an elegant ivory gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. She was radiant, confident, a woman who'd learned to believe in love again. Edwards's vows came straight from his heart. You taught me that the world's expectations mean nothing compared to genuine connection, that age is irrelevant when two souls recognize each other. I promise to stand beside you, always, to see you, to choose you, to love you for all our years. Armani's vows made half the guests cry. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. When the world told me I was too old, too damaged, too broken, you looked at me like I was everything. You taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to let someone in. I promise to honor that bravery, to match it with my own, every day for the rest of our lives. When they kissed husband and wife, it was the culmination of everything. Years of loneliness ending, months of fighting for each other, A lifetime of love beginning. 1 year Latridwood sat in the back of the conference room, watching as Amani led the quarterly strategy meeting. She commanded the space effortlessly now, her ideas sharp, her leadership undeniable. The board hung on her every word. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, that private smile that was just for him. When the meeting ended and people filed out, Edwards approached her desk. She was gathering her notes, the overhead lights catching on her wedding ring, the engagement diamond joined now by a matching platinum band. He covered her hand with his, their rings touching. "You were brilliant," he murmured. "You say that every time, because it's true every time." She laced her fingers through his, and for a moment, they just stood there, CEO and co, husband and wife, to people who'd chosen love over every obstacle the world had thrown at them. This was what mattered, not the age gap that had once seemed insurmountable, not the whispers that had tried to tear them down, not the expectations they defied. Just this, two souls who'd recognized each other, who'd been brave enough to say yes, who'd built something real from patience, devotion, and the courage to see beyond numbers to what truly mattered. Love that saw the soul before the years. And that's the end of today's story. Beautiful souls. A love that refused to bow to the world's expectations. A love that proved age is just a number when two hearts truly connect. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, for opening your hearts to Edwards and Amani's story. Remember, real love doesn't ask permission from the world. It doesn't apologize for defying expectations. It simply is brave, patient, unwavering. Thank you for listening and for being part of Dark Desire Studio. Until next time, keep believing in love that sees the soul, not the years, because that kind of love, it's worth fighting for. Always.